No, I couldn't get it.
Okay. Hello? Excellent. On the Zoom, you can hear. Just can't hear it here. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be talking loud because the mic doesn't work for in here, but at least our wonderful people who are on Zoom are going to be able to hear me, which is nice. So thank you all for being here today. We are so lucky to be in this partnership with She Recovers. The retreat, sorry, I'm going to turn off. There we go. The retreat and She Recovers, we really do share a similar mission. We share a mission of connection. Dawn and her daughter, Taryn Strawn, started She Recovers. It's really a grassroots effort. They've helped 325,000 women and non-binary people who identify in women communities to find recovery in all different forms, which is such an amazing feat, especially in times like through COVID and having that online community, having those retreats and having that connection that we all crave so much. I'm just honored that I've been able to explore what this looks like for the retreat and for She Recovers, bringing our organizations together. The retreat, if you don't know, we are a 12-step immersion program where we have residential, non-residential, sober living, and an amazing family program as well. Our residential is in our Wayzata campus, just about 3 minutes down the street from this church right here. We do 30, 60, 90 days. We have a women's program and a men's program. Our non-residential is going to be in either our St. Paul or Wayzata locations. And those are going to be on Mondays or Wednesdays, Tuesdays or Thursdays. And it's just 2 days a week, 2 hours a night. And it really just gets you back into that community and teaches you what the 12 steps can do for your recovery. Our sober living homes are in St. Paul. They're in that Summit Hill area, a beautiful, beautiful area. And we would love to tell you guys more about that. There's information on the table back there. Anybody who is in my Zoom, you can request information by emailing me. My email is in the Zoom. So for today, for the credits, anybody who's here getting the credits, if you are in person, I just need you to sign in on the sheet. Sherry has been diligent, so I'm pretty sure all of you who want the credits have signed in already. For the Zoom, if you have signed up and you want credits, just put your information into the Zoom chat, and I will get those certificates out to you via email in 1 to 2 weeks after this. So I just wanted to thank everybody again for being here, for being part of this. I want to thank Dawn for coming and presenting to us, doing Breakfast Club, having the dinner. It is just so special when you find an organization that just has those same values. You know, we're all here to represent recovery, and I'm so delighted to present Dawn.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Wayzata. I said yesterday at Breakfast Club, I'm so proud. It only took me 6 years to figure out how to say Wayzata. And I want to thank Tara, who I used to know was Tara Tobin, but Tara Tobin Taylor. We met 6 years ago and we dreamed of this moment of this week. And it's just so beautiful to be here actually and learning more about each other. So I'm really delighted. Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much to Rich and Ryan, who have they're just the super duo, amazing, amazing organizers. And it was, of course, my very great pleasure last night to have dinner with the staff and some of the staff, as well as John and some of the board members. We had a beautiful dinner last night, and it was just wonderful to connect with and learn more about everybody. I have a lot of aspirations in life, most of them to do with raising a beautiful family, hope that they stay healthy and happy, continue to be a voice in the women's recovery movement. That's really important to me. And I have a new aspiration, and that is to be as humble as John Curtis is, if I ever have any reason to be humble, because he's just pretty fantastic. And he knows Bill White, and you'll see in a few moments, like anybody who I want to know anybody who knows Bill White, William White, because I am a huge fan. So for those of you who are newly sober, you're okay. It's the screen, it's not you. And at first I was like, oh, that's a little, and then this just gives it a little more character. Right. So I actually really like it. And I might from here on in ask that we have this type of presentation, the wobbly presentation. I'm going to apologize in advance. I don't think I really need to, but for some reason, translating the PowerPoint to the laptop here in this venue didn't translate my notes over. I normally go off script anyway, so that's not that important. But if there might be some stats or some kind of details that I'm not going to have at my fingertips, so you'll have to bear with me. My name is Dawn Nicol. My pronouns are she, her. When I'm at home, I live on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples in what is now known as Victoria, British Columbia. I'm 63 years old. I haven't had a drink of alcohol since May 14th, 1987. Thank you. Okay, you have to stop clapping there because I smoked a lot of pot for 2 years. It's a lot of pot. But I've been living in recovery. I'm married to a person in long-term recovery. My daughter Taryn, the co-founder of She Recovers, is in recovery. I have a brother-in-law who's new to recovery. He's 2.5 years, and he probably, when we look at him, we thought he was one of those people. I never give up on people, but I'm like, I don't know if he's going to get it before he dies. And so grateful every day that he got it. And he lives in a place called Kelowna, British Columbia. And he has become so enmeshed in the AA community in Kelowna. And he's so cute. He texts me every single day to tell me something, usually to send me some sort of AA-ism that he assumes he's the only one that's heard it and nobody's heard this before. Did you ever heard this one? And sometimes I go, no, that's great, of course. But yeah, one day at a time is actually few of us know that one, Kevin. So it's pretty awesome. Make sure I know how to do this. In my professional life, I'm a consultant in the area of mental health, addictions, and intimate partner violence, focusing on gender and women. And I come to that work because that's how my recovery started. I left an abusive marriage. I had severe anxiety and depression and a lot of substance issues. My daughter Taryn is at home right now. She was supposed to be on a road trip with me this time, but she had a baby 8 months ago and she's at home. We're doing a big She Recovers in Chicago conference next weekend, and she's unable. She's made the decision to not travel with the baby. But I always really want to make sure that people know that Taryn and I did this together. We were two women in recovery, and I was a woman who had really traveled and traversed the more traditional way of recovery. I did treatment. I was very privileged to go to treatment in 1987. And then I got fully immersed and enmeshed in a 12-step recovery program for people who are in recovery from addiction. And Taryn grew up with a stepfather and a mom who were in 12-step recovery. So she knew everything about it. And when she was 16 and she fell into her own issues with drugs, she knew two things. She was open to the idea of recovery, and she didn't want to go to 12-step recovery with a bunch of old people. She was 16 years old. But she says to me now, she says, she remembered what she remembers about being a kid was that there was always lots of laughter, and that everybody loved one another, and that she heard about gratitude all of the time. So she grew up knowing that. And although I tried when she was 16 to force her, into my way of recovery, it didn't work. And I was working with a wonderful therapist who just said, let's let her find her own way. And she found her own way. And she found her way into yoga. And so that was the beginning of my thinking about, so she's okay. She's doing okay. She did end up with a return to use at about 20 after a few years, but she was doing well. And what had happened in my recovery program was, for the first 5 or 6 years, I was so involved in service. I was so involved in the program. And I really did become that person that now I love speaking to, that person who, this is my recovery plan, and this is the way it works, and this is the way it must work for everybody. And if you're not doing it this way, there's something wrong with you. And that was me. And that's just where I was. And I needed to believe that. I needed to have that strong belief and be firmly entrenched in that thinking in order for me to recover, because I had to stay where I was in order to recover. But over the years, 10 years now, 15 years in recovery, and what I saw was that I met so many people and I fell in love with so many women who it wasn't working for them. It wasn't their way. It didn't resonate for them. And so I would be the person telling them that, that's because there's something wrong with you. Some of them would leave because it just didn't fit and they couldn't do it. And some of them would die. like people that I loved, and almost like I feel like now when I look back, it's almost like I remember at the time thinking, did we manifest this overdose? Because we told them, if you stop going to meetings and if you stop doing this, you're going to use and you're going to die. And like that just still really, I feel like I was where I was when I was there, and I've forgiven myself for that. And I recognize that I can do better and I'm doing better. But I do wonder sometimes about some of the people that could have used the kind of help that I believe is available now, which is just a little bit more of a more open mind about recovery. The other thing that I witnessed in the women that I was falling in love with in recovery was some of them would leave and they would just go, I love it here and I'm going to come to meetings once in a while, but like I'm doing this, or I'm really into this meditation program, or I'm into CBT, or like doing all of these other things. And I would watch them because of course I was waiting for them to relapse, and they wouldn't. And they would maybe go back to school or get married and have a family. And so then I had these two kind of bodies of evidence. For some of us, if we leave and we don't have anything, it's harder to recover. Clearly, we may return to use and we may not keep our lives. But there's this other kind of fraction of the population who are just doing different things and still recovering and still thriving. So I really got curious about that. And it wasn't until 2011 when I hit the wall with workaholism that I started to I needed to recover again, and I needed to do something. And I was like, okay, well, there's a 12-step recovery program for workaholism, so I'm all set. But I started thinking about, as I started working that program and working those steps, how I was seeing a therapist. I'd started doing yoga, and I don't love yoga, but I lie down and do it because people say it's good for you. I was doing meditation. I changed some of the ways that I fed myself. I started drinking more water. I was exploring so many things, doing so much reading. And I realized that as I was thinking about this, I wanted to blog about it. So I started a blog called Recovering Dawn. And I was just talking about how we're all recovering from something. And it doesn't matter what you're recovering from. If you kind of develop a plan, then you're going to be okay. And there's all these things in the world to develop a plan from, starting with my knowledge base, 12-step recovery. But I also started talking about, and if that doesn't work for you, there's nothing wrong with you, that it's okay. And that's kind of how we got this thing called She Recovers. The blog became a little bit, quite popular. I returned to work after being off for 4 months and realized I couldn't blog at night and work all day, or I'd be back in the same situation. And so my daughter suggested in June 2011, that I start a Facebook page called, and I didn't want it to be about Dawn. I wanted it to be about all the people that I was meeting on the blog and having these conversations with. So we called it She Recovers. And I remember when at first she said, it's a fan page. And I'm like, what's a fan page? That's what they used to call them then. And so there is actually another account, because I didn't know how to do Facebook. So now there's an account called She Recovers that is like a personal account that has nothing going on in it. But we launched the Facebook page, and the rest is history. We have touch points of over 300,000 people. And last year, actually, we believe that we actually touched in some way across all of our platforms 3 million women. So this is, and this is my life's work. Currently it's my life's unpaid work, and I'm okay with that because it is my passion. We're a nonprofit, and we hope that one day we'll have a CEO who can really do all the CEO type work, and that I can just go out and talk in front of wiggly, beautiful screens like this, because my favorite thing to do is just talk with all of you and learn about what's working for you, and get people's ideas. So this talk is called A Matter of Life and Death: Why the Discourse Around Women in 12-Step Recovery Needs to Change. And this is born out of, again, I'm really fortunate, I think, that I am a person who, when I speak to groups, to individuals about 12-step recovery, it's strengths, it's miracles, and it's shortcomings, because everything and everybody has some shortcomings. I believe that I get the respect that I need because I come at it from within the tradition. I am a member of a 12-step recovery program. The only requirement for membership for my program is a desire to stop using. And I have that today, have for the last 34 years since I stopped smoking pot, and will have, I believe, for the rest of my life. And so I don't come at it as a person who has, I think, a healthy critique of 12-step recovery, and yet somebody who's outside of the tradition. So I feel like I know enough about the program after 34 to 36 years of hanging around, doing so many sets of steps, sponsoring dozens of women, having 4 sponsors myself in my recovery to date. And so I come at it with a place of love and absolute respect for 12-step programs. And we can do better in 12-step recovery. And it's okay if people want to recover outside of 12-step recovery. And those are kind of my messages for today. So the discourse defined, I was like, I'm really a geek when it comes to definitions. So when we're talking about 12-step or not 12-step or 12-step and other things as well, the noun discourse comes from the Latin discursus to mean an argument. And this talk is really about like, I think we need to stop arguing. We're wasting too much time arguing, thou shalt 12-step or thou shalt not. It's immaterial at this point. People are dying. We all know the statistics. We all know somebody who's been affected by the epidemics that are around us, mental health and addiction. So we could also say a formal and intense discussion or debate. That's certainly the debate and discussions that I've been having for the past 10 years. We can get pretty heated. And I kind of like this the best, though. It's an exchange of ideas through conversation, sometimes with great passion. And so I look forward to, talking for a bit and then really hearing from all of you, because I do want this to be a two-sided conversation. Okay, so the learning objectives today, we're going to explore the concept of individualized recovery patchworks. We're going to talk about 12-step recovery and how it can be both transforming and empowering for some women, many women, and not work for others. And we're going to talk a little bit about the harm perpetuated when multiple pathway proponents dismiss 12-step recovery as a recovery option. And what I mean by that is in the world of recovery advocacy and the recovery movement, I think about the modern kind of recovery movement as really the last version of it kicking off in 2012. With the release of the film, The Anonymous People. And if you have not seen the film, The Anonymous People, it is available free online and you should watch it. Every single 12-step member in the world should watch this film. It's really fantastic. And so we have this, and again, it's been more decades than just the last 12 years, but there's been this movement of multiple pathways of recovery. And what I've discerned and what I've noticed in the several years that I've been working and living and talking in this space is there are a lot of people who are proponents of and promoters of multiple pathways of recovery. But if you dig down and really understand, just these are mostly in the form of like individuals who have a microphone, who kind of have a megaphone. There's some people, and what they really mean is multiple pathways except for 12-step recovery, which I find is really interesting and it's really subtle, but it's there. And I think that there's as much damage with that as anything else, right? It's like, okay, you can do 12-step or you can do multiple pathways. Well, no, if it's multiple, then, 12-step recovery comes in under there. So that's been an interesting observation for me to make. It's really only been the last couple of years. And then we're going to consider some steps. Why not use the steps that recovering individuals, professionals, and programs can take to create a more unified recovery ethos. So here's our why. Again, I'm, talking about women. I love the men, although this feels like much more of the audiences that I'm used to speaking at, where there's, primarily women with a few lovely gentlemen. Yesterday, it was like there were a lot of dudes at that breakfast club. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not used to this, but really lovely, lovely men who came up and spoke afterwards to me. And it was really lovely. And I think it's, I'm just happy to see a few gentlemen here again today. From 1999 to 2017, the death rate from drug overdose among women aged 30 to 64 years increased by 260%. From 2018 to 2020, alcohol-related deaths increased by 14.7% per year for women, compared to 12.5% increase per year. Women have always wanted to catch up and exceed men in a lot of areas. This is not one that we're particularly happy or proud of. We're at the highest risk for developing a substance use disorder between the ages of 18 to 44. When a lot of us, not all of us, and certainly many of us choose not to, but many of us are having children. So the intervention kind of time is here, because when a woman recovers, her child has a better chance. Her family does. And when women heal, families heal, communities heal. And one day the world will heal because of our recovery. Women are nearly twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with depression, be affected by eating disorders, and 40% of women do have an anxiety disorder. When I was meeting with my therapist and my physician in 2011 when I thought I was losing my mind. And I was really, I said it was kind of like a breakdown, but it was really a breakthrough around workaholism. My physician wrote a note for me to stay off a few. She said, you're going to need some time off. And I said, I'll take 2 days. And she said, you'll take 2 months. And I took 4. And she wrote this note saying, here's why you're going to be off. And she wrote GAD. And I'm like, what's that? And she said, it's generalized anxiety disorder. And I said, oh, that's a good one. And she said, I said, yeah, that'll work. And she said, no, that's what you have. And, I kind of dug into that a little bit. And of course, as many of us do, came to the realization that anxiety was at the bottom of everything. Everything. It was living, that little girl in that house where I was scared to make noise. I was scared to do something wrong. The things that were going on. And so it's really been helpful for me to understand that anxiety is kind of the foundation of my disease, and that I'm able to treat the anxiety these days almost, pretty well. I just said I don't have the good sense to get nervous about speaking, but I do get pretty nervous and anxious about a lot of other things. So our why is because women are dying, and that's my refrain. Women are dying. When somebody's having a useless argument about whether somebody should go to 12-step or whether 12-step is good or bad, and I'm like, women are dying. We don't have to be having this conversation. But I also feel that as people in recovery, as people who offer like cutting edge, amazing programs like the retreat does, we should be redefining our own ideas about recovery as we recover and as we grow. Recovery isn't a static thing. It's like the world is changing around us and our ideas have to change with them continuously. We want to evolve our understanding of recovery. A big focus in the She Recovers Foundation this year has been, we are redefining recovery. We've been doing that for a while, but we never actually kind of put that catchphrase on it. I was so excited to meet last night to talk with John, and because he knows William White. Somehow William White kind of came into my life around the time of the Anonymous People because he was in that film. And I was like, who is this guy? And I went to, and for those of you who know the William White papers, it was this website where he's the most prolific writer on recovery, I think, in the world. And he had all these articles about everything, like peer recovery and multiple path, all these, everything. But it was on a black website, and it was the hardest thing to read. And I would have to download everything. He's got a new website. It's much easier to read. But in 2016, so I'm a few years into this thing called She Recovers, and all we really are is a Facebook page with thousands of people joining us like every month, and a retreat program because Taryn loves yoga. I pretended to love yoga. So we were hosting yoga and recovery retreats all over. We went, a number of different places across the world. 63 retreats, I think we've hosted to date. But I found this reference to William White in 2012, and I kept reading him. And it wasn't until every time there was a new article, I would read it. And in 2016, I read this: recovery pathways are not always a pathway. And there's 3 paragraphs, and I'm going to read them because this is, in my view, this is the foundation of my thinking. This is really kind of where, when we turned around in 2016 and wrote our first set of intentions and guiding principles, there you have a beautifully designed card version of them on your table. This William White's ideas were instrumental in formulating ours. So the image of pathway suggests a crossroads with distinct options that call for a clear decision-making or voiced guidance from some GPS of addiction recovery. The image conveys that one must choose A, B, or C, with some advocates of each standing at the crossroads, claiming they represent the one true path to recovery. And like when I visualize that, it's kind of like, come on over here. No, come choose us. And it's kind of like, when you're new in recovery, like, honestly, I do believe, and I believe very strongly, I think that introducing 12-step recovery and, the 12-step facilitation programs that are in many treatment centers, I think that's a good option. Like, I argue that that is really helpful because then you're introduced to, here's a way. Here's a process for self-development and growth and healing. And, it's got these steps and it's easy to follow. And this is the way for you to kind of get back into your life. And I think that that's really helpful. Am I moving out? Am I in the wrong place again this whole time? Sorry, I just panicked because I remember that Stephen said I should stay over here. Doing it wrong. I'm doing it wrong. Inner critic voice. You're so stupid. So I just think that, I really I continue to think about this. He goes on to say, there are millions of people living in recovery within these established frameworks of recovery. But there are also innumerable people in long-term recovery who have crafted a style of personal recovery at or beyond the boundaries of these approaches. And again, that was kind of like, for me, that dropped in. It was like, yeah, these are all these people that are out there that we thought were going to use and die. And now they're like multimillionaires and they have businesses and thriving families and they're doing great. Or, you know, they don't have to be multimillionaire to be. But it's, you know, I was seeing these examples of people that we were pretty sure, because they stopped going to their Sunday morning meeting, that they were not going to survive. So their recovery experiences are dynamically evolving in the sense that critical ingredients are regularly being forged and exchanged without a predetermined map or fixed point of completion. Their recovery experiences are patchworks, mandalas, or mosaics, in the sense that this style of recovery may combine unusual and even contradictory elements, the whole of which may resemble no established style of recovery. And I will tell you that when we went to write our intention guiding principle that says we must be supported to find and follow individualized pathways and patchworks of recovery, we went back and forth. Is it a patchwork? Is it a mandala? Is it a mosaic? We landed on patchwork. Again, you know, we know that that is really what we meant. It's what works for us. So there that is. And this is kind of, you know, this is the life that I think a lot of us live in sometimes. I know in our own community, we have over 220 volunteers in the She Recovers Foundation, and a lot of them work online in our Facebook group, which is called She Recovers Together. There's about 13,000 individuals in there. It's a very active group. I think we have like 10 admins who are constantly kind of monitoring it. And we only started that group actually in January 2018. And over for the first several years, I think people were in there and having this conversation. It was kind of like people were trying to mark their territory. I'm 12-step. I'm not 12-step. I hate 12, like all of the kind of the spectrums, right? And we were very clear from the beginning, and we're very clear to this day. We support all pathways and we criticize none. You can go in that group and you can say, you know, I tried 12-step. It wasn't for me. I had some unfortunate experiences. I felt rejected by a sponsor because I used, like, you can claim your experience, but you can't follow that up with AA is a cult. Nobody should ever go there. Right. So, and really what we've done now is that we used to have like our admins, our volunteer admins go in there and they'd say, can you please rephrase what you just said? Because we don't do that here. And now it's the group members themselves. Everybody just monitors the space themselves. Right. And so we have these conversations, but we don't have, you know, and we don't put up with my pathway is better than your pathway. The polarizing debate serves no useful purposes. Again, women are dying. Women are dying. I love the idea that no one group, organization, or program has a monopoly on women's healing. And I think we have to take this a little bit further. It's, not only is my pathway or my patchwork or what I'm doing not better than what you're doing, but if somebody really doesn't kind of know what to do in recovery, we can recommend what we do. I mean, that's speaking from owner experience is the strongest position to speak from. But we could also have information at our disposal if people are like kind of immediately like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. I think even as 12-step members, we can say, have you heard of Women for Sobriety? Have you heard of She Recovers? Have you heard of Recovery Dharma? Like, you know, we can educate ourselves. Not that we don't want to entice and invite people into our way of of living and recovering. That is our passion. This is what we know best. But I think that we do also have a responsibility to know what else might work, so that when we have somebody in our midst, a sponsee, somebody that we're learning about and growing with, that we can introduce them to other. And it doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong with what we're doing, right? Okay. Again, this is Bill White. Many find recovery within a well-trod path, while others find recovery on the road less traveled. Still others will find recovery where no one has traveled before. Such differences do not need to be cast into categories of superiority and inferiority. All progressive movements toward and within recovery are cause for celebration, no matter how different the journey from our own. William White. And then, whoops, here we go. Neither I nor anyone else can take away. So look at this. This is Charlotte Castle. Is anybody familiar with this book? It was written in 1992. You might have heard over the years of the 16-step recovery program, Charlotte Castle. Charlotte Castle is amazing. I've had conversations with her. She's in her 80s. she might even be older now. It's just a wonderful book. And what I love about her book, she's a social worker, again, just really struggled with alcoholism. And she talks about, the need for nutrition and movement and all these, like in 1992, she's talking about holistic recovery. It's really an amazing book. And this is so powerful for me that neither I nor anyone else can take away someone's program by speaking of other ways. When someone thinks when you think I can take away your way of recovering, it's because you have not internalized your own belief system and you're giving your power to me to take that away. And I just think that is so powerful. I love this. We have this on memes that we splash around our groups all the time. So what are some of those pathways? And in the version that translated, so not everything translated on this PowerPoint, but in my version, 12-step recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, etc., is kind of highlighted because that's what I started with. That was me. That was me for 15 years. That's all I did. And I can tell you that I have not done, I've done inpatient twice. I haven't done intensive outpatient or partial hospitalization or sober living, but I can tell you that I've tried absolutely every single other thing on here, except for I Thirst. I Thirst just, and so it doesn't mean that I've committed and like done a whole bunch, but I've researched and made myself familiar with and gotten into some of these things. I Thirst is something that I found about just last week, so I just added to it. And it's the Catholic Church's. Are any of you familiar with Celebrate Recovery, which is, so it's like the Catholic Church wanted their own 12-step based program, and it's called I Thirst. I think it's a weird name. I haven't looked into it closely enough. I was just in Washington, D.C. at the Mobilized Recovery Conference, and somebody I met there told me about it, so I put it on here to remind myself to dig in a little deeper. But unfortunately, what she told me was that it's actually, there's some of the language and some of the descriptions of who you are, if this program is for you, is rather shame-based. So that's a little bit unfortunate. But I want to check it out. I'm not going to, what is that saying that we have all the time and I can never remember it? What's that? Sorry? Contempt prior to investigation. So I'm sorry, I sound a bit contemptuous about it, but I don't know. I'm Catholic. So I feel like, again, I'm coming from within a tradition. I feel like I have the permission to talk about what is this I Thirst. Weird. So what I want to talk about a little bit is, again, the differences, like why do women stay in 12-step recovery programs and why do they not? Any of you know The Clash, the song, 1981? Should I stay or should I go? All together now. Why do we stay? Why do we stay? We stay because we feel connected, right? We feel connected to, I remember the first time I saw the steps, I was petrified and also like, I'm in. Like, this just makes sense, right? Powerless, it was jumping out at me. Defects jumped out in a big way. Like, yeah, I'm in the right place. I'm a big walking defect. I belong here. And the community, right? I always say, like, it's the women in the program who saved my ass. Hands down. I'll be honest, for the first couple of years, I thought there were a few guys in the program that were maybe going to be responsible for my salvation. Not so much. And then as I shared yesterday at breakfast, I ran into a person I used to use with when I was 16, 17, 18, and I ran into him at a Narcotics Anonymous convention in June 1989. I was 3 weeks off of the marijuana. And I met him and I went into it was a marathon meeting because I didn't belong in that room of people all dressed up. And I just felt like death. So I went into a marathon meeting and I heard in the corner of the room this voice that said, "I know you." And I was like, you don't want to hear that when you have 3 weeks clean in the city that you ripped off so many people on drug deals, that, you did all sorts of things that you never want to think about again. But I didn't have my glasses on because they'd broken. And I really liked that about myself at that time. I wouldn't wear my glasses because if I couldn't see you, you couldn't see me. But I went over into the corner and I was got down and I was like, "Oh, it's Alan. Never slept with you. I don't owe you any money and I don't think I ever ripped you off." So we started a friendship and we were friends for about 6 months. And then we realized maybe it was going to be more, but we were in recovery and it wasn't a year. And fortunately, his sponsor was married to my sponsor and they'd gotten together when they each had 2 weeks. So they gave us their blessing and we celebrated 31 years of marriage in December. Yeah. Yeah. He's my biggest champion, my greatest support. I love him. So yeah, we stay because there's this prescribed process, right? There's literature, there's kind of a pathway. It makes sense. I don't know about you, but when I got into recovery, like I wasn't really able to sort things out on my own. I needed you to tell me what to do. And whereas now one of the greatest critiques I have is that I think that and I'm going to speak only to women in the program because that's what I come as. I think as women, sometimes we prescribe a little too much about what other women should do. But in the beginning, I think really making strong suggestions, supporting them to make their own decisions based on our suggestions is the way to go rather than telling them, what thou shalt do. I mean, I stayed because the focus on spirituality worked for me. I was a child in the 70s and I just really loved the idea that I could develop my own God, again, coming out of the Catholic tradition. Don't strike me down. I'm not a big Jesus person. I know Jesus, Jesus he had his thing and I love that he did that. And I love that other people love him for that. I'm a Mary girl. Like, this is my higher power. Mary's always been my higher power. And the fact that I found out fairly soon that Mary could be my higher power, I was like, okay, I'm hanging. I'm going to stay. There's no cost. I mean, if you don't have the money to put in the seventh tradition, nobody glares you down. Like, they just pass it on, keep going. There's a variety of meeting groups and formats. There were not women's groups when I started in recovery. Oh my gosh, thank heavens there are now, in my view. I like going to both types of meetings, but women's meetings are where it's at for me. And also the ability to mentor or mentor. I remember thinking fairly early in recovery, like, I get to kind of be like one of those people who everybody looks up to eventually, I think, right? And the idea that I could learn from people. I didn't know that I was going to be able to hold that position and kind of be a person who could help other women recover. But fairly early on, I got the whole, okay, when I stay here long enough, I'm going to be a person that somebody might come to and want and that was an invitation to me to stay. The service orientation, I liked that there was lots to do. When I started in recovery, like, I was the ashtray emptier. My kids now, because I used to take my kid, I was a single mom on welfare and I had no car. And the only meeting that I could go to was in a church basement in Red Deer. And then another one do you say Alano? Like, how do you say those clubs here?
Alano.
It's so funny. In Canada, we call them Alano. So so different. But we would go there. And so Taryn talks in particular about like sitting coloring in a meeting, like just blue with smoke, right? And it's like, it was a really good place to take children back in the day. I got very involved in service. And again, I shared about this a little bit yesterday. I got so involved in service that at one point I recognized that I was hiding in service just like I'd been hiding in substances, and that I needed to find that elusive thing called balance. I'm still searching for that in my life, only now with workaholism. But I did have to step back after about 8 or 9 years, because I could tell that my kids would start kind of groaning when I was off to another weekend of service at the national level, etc. So that's why we stay. Why should we go? Well, we shouldn't. I think we should stay. But I think as women in recovery, as women in 12-step recovery, we could just do things to make it easier for women to stay or to check us out in the first place. I wrote a blog, I think 4 years ago, called Dear Women in 12-Step Programs. And it went viral, and it's still available on our blog, on our website. And these are some of the things that I talked about in that blog post. These are some of the reasons that women leave or never come into 12-step recovery. And it's the methods of identification, like they don't want to identify as being an alcoholic or an addict. And that, in my recovery, that was just not an option. You did it or you got glared out. You probably still get glared out in places. And I think, like, at the end of the day, how important is that when a woman comes into a recovery meeting and sits down? How is that the main thing that we focus on when she shares that she didn't identify with the label that we think she should? And again, I always, if I'm in an AA meeting, my name is Dawn and I'm an alcoholic. If I'm in an NA meeting, my name is Dawn and I am an addict, and that is ingrained in me. I do that because the reason I say I do that now is because I want to be able to use those labels, those terms that have so much stigma out in the real world. I want to be able to say it with no emotional attachment to it. It's like, it's just what it is. And so I do that. But I see increasingly, and I think the interesting thing that we have to take note of is that a lot of women are finding or seeking recovery earlier in their journey. So they're not identifying because they don't have the same experiences. They're not hitting hard bottoms. They're making decisions about healing, which is what recovery is, earlier along the spectrum of substance use. And they don't want to use that label. And they may eventually, if they stay, they might come to understand that you do that for the new people and all of the other reasons we do it. But, I do think that it is, it's like not what we should be focusing on when a new person comes into a program, is whether or not they use that. First of all, they may not know they're supposed to, or that, why other people are doing that. They may not think they are. They may just not identify with it. They may really feel stigmatized by using that. The perceived, religiosity of the programs is obviously a reason. People have religious trauma. They have religious trauma, and it's so, deeply ingrained in people's experience. If you're hardwired by that trauma, 12-step recovery is not going to work, because we can say it's not a religious program all we want. But as long as there's a word, the God word is in there, people aren't going to trust that we mean that. The emphasis on hard bottoms, again, I just love seeing. We do say that in our community, there are women. There's this whole movement of, some people call it gray area drinking, and there's a woman named Jolene Park who termed it early exiting on alcohol for women. And it's different. It's not how I got to recovery. I was not like that. And I share this story sometimes, that not too long ago, a few years ago, somebody was sharing with me, and I was like, well, and what brought you into sobriety? Because this person had, some sobriety, and they were in abstinent sobriety. And I said, like, what happened for you? And she said, well, one morning I woke up and I realized that I had blacked out the night before. And I knew it was time to stop drinking. And I was like, okay, like, that was your first time blacking out? She said, yeah. And I said, and like the next day, you're like, that's the end? And she said, yeah. And I was like, wow. I too blacked out the first time I drank, and every time after for the next 10 years. So that's the type of women that are coming into this movement. The toxic sponsorship practices, and I feel really strongly about this. I've had nothing but the best, most understanding, patient, wonderful sponsors that you could ever have in the world. And we talk now, some of them, when we do have an opportunity to speak with it. Actually, one of my dearest sponsors just passed away from cancer last year. But, when we talk about and, just giggle about Dawn and the things that she thought, kind of things like when I was doing my women's studies degree early in recovery, I went back to school and stayed for 13 years. And I decided that my capstone project for my women's studies degree was to change the language in Narcotics Anonymous to goddess, or like to include the use of goddess. And, people just kind of giggle. Yeah, you go ahead, you try that out, see how that, report back. How does that go? But that's not the toxic sponsorship practices. The toxic sponsorship practices are, why do we have to say, my sponsor fired me? Like, why does somebody have to be fired in a 12-step program for healing? Why does somebody have to be told that if you don't go to 90 meetings in 90 days, I can't sponsor you? I was a single mom on welfare, no car, 2 kids, no babysitter. I couldn't do 90 meetings in 90 days. If somebody had said something, like, I would be out of there. And the firing thing is, here's the thing. We are people who have been traumatized and rejected at some point in our life, most likely, and shamed about who we are. And so to come into a 12-step program and just do our best, which isn't how you're doing it, because you've been doing it for 5, 10, 15, 25 years. I've been here for 4 days. But because we're not getting it as fast as you think we should, and I get that as sponsors, we have your best interests at heart, that doesn't mean we get to shame you, and doesn't mean we get to kind of beat on you because you're not doing the things exactly as we say they should. And I know this is hard sometimes to hear, but I was that sponsor. I never told anybody to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. But, you know, I was that, like, I'm sorry, I can't sponsor you if you're going to continue to relapse. And today, I guess, you know, I would do it differently. I would not, because I see that as rejection. I would just really try to, like, what more do you need? Who different do you need? Like, what's not working here for you? And how can we get what will work for you? I'm not sure I'm doing, you know, I'm not sure that I'm the best mentor or guide for you right now. And that's, you know, kind of how I speak to people when I'm talking about recovery, as somebody who's, you know, kind of really struggling. Because I don't look at it as a failing on them. I'm looking like what need of theirs isn't getting met, and how can we help her find what that is. The relapse shaming. I mean, I know, again, like the whole, I mean, I count days. I have haven't done cocaine, haven't done alcohol, haven't done, and I think that for me, I'm a counter, but I also know, see, and witness all the time the shame that women have when they have to come back in, and it's day one again. In my book, if you have an opportunity to catch my book, one of the first things I wrote in that book was something I felt passionate about, which is, what if instead of day one again, like, what if we taught women to go, day one again, like, I'm here again, I'm doing it again, like, look at me, I'm so resilient, I'm going to try again. You know, and just kind of change how we look at a return to use. And then again, yeah, there's oftentimes unrealistic expectations around the number of meetings, the amount of service required, and the pressure to share. This is a big one, you know. So in our meetings, we have, and I think, you know, I know there's other 12-step meetings online, but in our online gatherings, which take place at 11 and 7 every single day, and then we have a number of identity-based groups on the weekend for LGBTQ+, BIWOC, healthcare and allied professionals, including anybody who works in the treatment space. We, you know, right built into our script is, you will not be required to share, and you will not be called upon to share. If you would like to share, raise your hand. And, you know, I know women who they won't come to our meeting until they find that out, because they're so afraid that someone's going to ask them to speak, and they don't have the words yet. And again, you know, what I was taught, and I shared this yesterday as well, I was taught when somebody asks you to share, you share. And so I'm like, that's no matter what, no matter where I am. If I'm on an airplane and somebody asks me something, I'm going to just spill. But I've learned over the years, like, how traumatic that can be. Like, if you're a person who, like, you don't have the words, or you just don't have what you need to open your mouth and start talking about what's going on for you. So I think that just like I had the pleasure of attending John Curtis's and Drew Horowitz presentation last month or the month before. Time's a little bit mixed up right now, talking about how we can take all these principles of the 12 steps and actually not just take them, but we recognize that so many of the principles that guide our 12 steps are also enmeshed and immersed in other ways of recovery, including many of the ones that we've looked at a little bit earlier here. And I guess what I want to advocate is that we can take some of the other things and best practices that we learn out in the recovery world and in the mental health world, like trauma-informed care, into it. And that I don't mean that I want to go in and revamp the 12-step process or meetings or anything else. But as individuals, if we understand a little bit more about what is trauma-informed care, then we wouldn't be asking somebody who's sitting in a corner in their very first meeting you've never seen before, she's crying, she's clearly in a lot of distress, you know, and your first thing is going to be, do you want to share? You know what you can do? You can have somebody whisper in her ear, do you feel like you want to share? You know, so just those types of things. The judgment around doing other work. You know, there was actually a time early in recovery when, and there's something missing on here, I just realized I'll talk about in a moment. When I started kind of venturing out into doing other things, like, you know, even looking at like Women for Sobriety, like, people judged me, and they're like, and I get it too, because I did it as well. When people were starting to go to other things, like, quite frankly, when I was in Narcotics Anonymous and women would start going to AA, I would say, why are you doing that? And they would say, because I'm tired of being the oldest person in the room with, like, having the most recovery. I need to go where there are people who are ahead of me. And I would go, I was not into that at all. Like, you stay here with us. And I realized it's fear-based. I didn't want them to go because I didn't want to be the one left. You know, I didn't want to be the person with the most time in the room. So it's fear-based. But again, other people doing therapy, you know, I actually had a woman who I was sponsoring, and the sponsor before had hired her because she was doing psychotherapy, and her sponsor said, you don't need that. And I know that, John Curtis and all the people at the retreat and most of the people in the recovery movement today don't have that thinking, but it is in some still corners of our own fellowships. And then the other one is medication. And I'm not going to get into the whole medication assist, like that's that's too big for me to stand up here. I could do this for another hour or two, but I remember in 1989, Prozac was brand new, kind of, and my husband had cancer and he had surgery and he couldn't rebound from the cancer surgery. And he was depressed, like he was clinically depressed. And the doctor prescribed Prozac, which I think there were lots of doctors prescribing Prozac. And I was like, no, you're not taking Prozac. And to his credit, he said, shut up. It's not you. He doesn't say shut up, but he said, step down. This is my health. I'm taking Prozac. He took it for 6 months. And, if you're watching, honey, he's been depressed ever since. No, he's been good. He's been good. He's doing good. I to be honest, I'm not sure he figured out how to get on here. He's been asking me for 4 days how to do, and is it on, what is it, Thursday? What's that? And he didn't know the difference. So, but if you're here, I love you and you know it. And then, women don't become, because there's a stigma associated with 12-step recovery, because it's for those people. It's for alcoholics. I am not an alcoholic. Therefore, why would I go there? And, I always like to take this moment in time when I'm talking about the stigma of 12-step recovery to speak the other end of that. And that is that we cannot separate the idea of privilege from the availability of 12-step recovery. The whole, I'm not going there because it's those people. There's people who have that thought who are, quite frankly, have the privilege to do something different. They can go to recovery retreats. They can, do intensive therapy that costs a lot of money. They can work with somatic healers, and all of these things are valid. But if you're a single mom on welfare with no car and 2 kids, you want to access what you can. And so I advocate and argue all the time that I think that for anybody in recovery, I think checking out a 12-step program should be your first step in recovery. But your second step should be be knowing that, and if it doesn't resonate, that's okay. You should know what other options are. One of the most beautiful things that I've seen in our community are women who come in, because it is, and I can never remember that saying, the contempt prior to investigation. I've heard it for 36 years. Every time I go to say it, I have to go what is it? Just a block. And so we have so many women in our community in the first few years online in particular, where I'm not going to those meetings. Why not? Because they're horrible. They're a cult. Or how is your experience of knowing that? Because somebody told me, or somebody in this, somebody just says those things. And after a while, what happened with us is from 2018 then to 2020, and then through the first couple of years of the pandemic, the last 2 years, what I've seen are women who, they've been online, they've made there's people in here from She Recovers, raise your hand, and they met each other online, and now they're looking for in-person connection, or they have been for the last 2 years. And there probably isn't a She Recovers meetup or sharing circle in their communities, because we're just a baby nonprofit and we don't have the resources to spread it as widely as we hope to. And they will go I really need in-person. And somebody else will say, find a women's AA meeting. I don't do it. No, just try it. Just try it. And I can tell you literally in the last 2 years since we started going back out into the world, I could tell you there are dozens of women who are now regularly attending women's AA or NA meetings, because they got there and they had, for me, I see it as, and I'd have to ask them if this is their exact experience, but what I perceive it happened is they heard the messages that we talk about all the time. When we talk to people about 12-step recovery, I coach people and I say, when you get there, and when somebody comes up to you at the end of the meeting and says, okay, here's my number, I'm going to sponsor you, or here's the meeting list, you have to go to whatever, you just need to say, oh, I'm sorry. So I thought the only requirement was a desire to stop drinking. Am I in the wrong place here? So I do think that women go into these meetings with a little bit of recovery and understanding and education, and they just feel confident enough to say, I'm going to take what I like and I'm going to leave the rest. And it has to work for them, right? Do I think that if you're in a 12-step recovery program, there's definitely things that you should be doing. You should be doing the things that are suggested. Yes, but they are suggestions. And we don't get to reject you, because you're not taking us up on those suggestions in our time. So what are we going to do? Our pathway forward. I thought that was kind of cute. And I started with, I was going to do 12 steps. 12 steps from if we are a person who is a strong proponent of 12-step recovery, and 12 steps for if we're not. And I got as far as 5, and I thought 5's good. 5's my number. My birthday's May 5th. I do everything in 5s. And plus there was just, I think there's just too many things that we could do. So if we are a person who believes very, very strongly that 12-step recovery is the way, who from our own experience knows that this is the way for us, these are some of the things I think that we can do to develop kind of our thinking around this. And the step 1 is to admit there's no one-size-fits-all approach to women's recovery. Just admit it. We're powerless over this fact. It's just the truth. Step 2, believe in women, right? Trust that they are competent and capable of knowing what works for them. Trust that new, unfamiliar modalities also have the potential to save lives, and try out some new things yourselves. And if you don't want to try them out, at least investigate them. And I know that therapists, do we have any therapists in the room? Yeah, I know that therapists do this all the time. And when Taryn and I are presenting at behavioral health conferences, or well, when we were in 2019, which is more the last time we were doing, like we did about 6 that year, therapists would come up to us and treatment programs and say how happy they were to learn that there are some other alternatives because they only ever had 12-step programs to refer to. Step 4, this is like deeply examine our ideas about how women should recover. Think and write about it, kind of like a 4th step. Like if, I mean, I had to look deeply at when I started having this conversation in cyberspace about what works and doesn't work. I had to really challenge my own biases. Like I was extremely biased in the direction of 12-step recovery. And I needed to not have that bias carry into the conversation. I needed to dissolve it. And I think I'm getting there. I hope I'm getting there. But I do still think about it, write about it. My book is a lot about it. I kind of play through my thinking on that. My book, and because what I'm really proud of is that I do come to this from within the tradition. So I feel like I do have the experience and knowledge to speak from both sides. And I hate that I have to say from both sides. I want, like, this is, these conversations I want people to have so that we can dissolve that binary. Step 5, get curious and have brave, vulnerable discussions about our beliefs with people who believe differently. I was at the Mobilized Recovery Conference in Washington, D.C., and it was a session on peer support. And this poor gentleman, I still feel badly for him. Like he's in a room full of harm reductionists, like maybe the strongest harm reduction voices in the country. And he was trying to understand, like he was really trying to understand. And he used his voice and he said, well, I just don't get it. Like I have this guy and I'm supporting him and he just got out of jail and he's not doing heroin, but he's drinking. So like, he's not clean. Everybody in the room just like bump on him. And I went up to him at the end and I said, are you NA? He said, yeah. I said, I'm NA too. I said, yeah. I said, this is it's a deeply complicated topic. And you don't need to figure out where you're at with it now. I said, just keep an open mind, like lean into it a little bit, learn about some things, keep having these conversations. You'll land in a place that's more comfortable for you. And I said, and also, I think that there were a few people here who owe you amends because they didn't have to come after you in quite the way they did too. You come from a tradition that you're questioning this new way of being. And all of us are still. I'm not always certain, other than I know that I believe strongly that dead people can't recover. And so I am a proponent for harm reduction, but it's not that simple. There's so many nuances with it. So, okay, and what if you are a person who is not a 12-step advocate? Well, you have some steps too. I think you need to admit the 12-step recovery does work for millions of individuals and women in our case here. Read the research, read John Kelly's research. John, can you brought out a stat last night, and I think it's in my thing, but you were talking about John Kelly's research and what he found.
Yeah, they found that 60% better outcomes for abstinence.
Yeah.
At every touch point after treatment, 3, 6, 9, out to 5 years.
5 years. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the research is there. And that's so that argument that's been around and is still around, an outdated argument that, well, there's no evidence about about 12-step recovery. It's just not true anymore. And so we, and I like to point out John Kelly's work. And John Kelly is working with the retreat on a project. And I've had conversations with his team about doing some research with She Recovers that I'm very excited about. Again, like, believe women, believe them when they talk and write about how the amazing lives they lead are because of 12-step recovery. Like, we don't make this shit up. Here we go. See, I wrote it down. This time. Don't practice contempt prior to investigation. Trust that older, more traditional modalities do have the potential to save lives. Try out some 12-step open meetings for women. And you can do that whether you're a person in recovery that only does women for sobriety, only does recovery dharma. Like, just check it out. You might be surprised. Somebody went to, oh, I know, we had a retreat. So we've held 63 retreats. And because we're not 12-step, we don't plan meetings on our retreats. But what we say on the first night is, and there's there's 40 to, I think about 40% of the women in the She Recovers community identify as being in a 12-step recovery program. So at our retreats, we say, we don't plan them just because we really want to adhere to the whole, we're not choosing any particular path, but there's a lot of people here. I know there's people here who in 12-step recovery. If you want to have a meeting, two requests, let everybody know what time it's at and make everybody feel welcome. So we did that in this one night of our last retreat in Mexico at this beautiful venue that they've now sold and we can never go to again. And I'm heartbroken. And so we had this AA meeting out on the veranda. And at the end of it, one of the women who'd never been to it, like, she had, I think by this time, maybe 4 years of sobriety through She Recovers, never been to an AA meeting. That was her first AA meeting. And she came up to me at the end. She said, it's just like telling stories. Like, it's just stories. And I said, yeah, it's just stories. And she loved it. Deeply examine our ideas about how women should recover. Again, like I said, for those of us who are proponents of 12-step recovery, think and write about it while we're at it, think about the role of privilege in recovery. I think that's so important. And again, the same step, get curious and have brave, vulnerable discussions about our beliefs with people who believe differently. Finalish thoughts. I overuse ish. Everybody will tell you. My editor actually said, we're not doing the ish thing in this book because you've got it in 17 places and it's just, women are dying. Women are dying while recovery advocates and providers are arguing about how they should recover. It's not okay. Everyone has a responsibility to spread the truth. And the truth is that there is no one right way to recover. We need to strive for unity over uniformity. That's my pitch. Thank you. And again, because you've got the cards, we don't need to do this. But the She Recovers mission is to redefine recovery, inspire hope, end stigma, and empower women seeking recovery from mental health issues, trauma, substance use, and related life challenges to increase their recovery capital, heal themselves, and help other women to do the same. And the intention and guiding principles are on the cards in front of you. So you don't have to, I'm not going to go through them, but aren't they pretty? I just love those cards. I just love them. And that's me. And I'm always available. I have some cards here too, if you want to continue this conversation. But I think we have some time to actually continue the conversation. Do we not? Great. I'm looking forward to going to the retreat this afternoon and meeting with the guests in the women program and let them talk. I said, after, by this time, I'm probably had enough talking at people. So I'd really love to invite people's comments, questions. And I'm totally always open to having kind of those passionate conversations. Yes, Kat.
Of trying to suss out the common themes of recovery among these diverse approaches. Say, for example, the significance of connection and community to each of these approaches, and even the word spirituality can be too confining, but this idea that something happens.
Yeah. Something
unexplainable happens. And is that a common denominator among approaches that have women who will say this work for me?
Oh gosh, geez. Can we ask somebody from our community to answer that question? Like what, just as an example of what is it that worked in the She Recovers meetings? Nicole?
As far as the connection, I think it's a soft spot to land with whatever you have that you need to share with, and I think the common thread is that community that you get somebody that says, I see you right where you're at. I'm not going to tell you what you have to do, what you need to do. I'm going to hold space for you right in it. But and then there's a variety of ways that people connect. Some send cards, some will offer their number to connect individually or reach out via different social media platforms. But I think just that the community that happens in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I think I would say it is connection. We have 3 pillars that we kind of talk about, and it's connection, support, and empowerment. And I think that, again, I see that in other programs. Like I think about I think about Women for Sobriety. I think about Charlotte Castle's 16 Steps. And it is definitely about connection with community, but also with oneself, with one's, kind of, for us, we take a holistic approach. So it's very much about connection to your body, connection to one another, connection to, if you choose to have a higher power or, something in that vein. The support it's like that you just feel supported, to know, like to be provided to referrals and resources. And then empowerment is so huge in our community. It really is. I love what Nicole said about it's a soft place to land. You come here, you have all sorts of questions, you have, you're hurting. And we just really try and give you the space to figure out, sometimes we say to figure out what it is you're recovering from. And then, give you the space and the tools and the information. We have our trusted resources, which the retreat is, right up there. And so it is just about, empowering people to make their own decisions about what they need, and then to help support them to get those needs met. I guess without, I'm a researcher, and I kind of take in my work, I do things pretty academically. So kind of without doing the literature review, I probably couldn't answer the way I would want to, but I definitely do think that connection is the number one thing. And, Johann Hari says that exact thing, right? That it's not what does he say? It's not about the addiction. It's about connection. Yeah. Yeah. And so for the Zoom, I guess they're not hearing these questions, right? Stephen is amazing. Amazing. Stephen, thank you. Diana. Right.
I mean, obviously, people within those groups.
Yeah.
However, I'm a nurse and I struggle with a certain set of issues around my recovery. Secrecy surrounding my recovery, for instance, my license can be taken away from me or put in jeopardy. That is a very strong bonding point for LGBTQ plus mothers of children with high needs. And when I came into the AA space, the 12-step space, it was very mysterious. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know how meetings worked. I didn't feel, and I feel like that was a piece of the online gift of COVID and the Zoom, was that I understood how things worked. There was a very well introduced set of guidelines. Walked into a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you. But for me, that really was a softer place to land.
And you say, speaking of nurses, I think Ryan and Tara and Rich said that at one point you're going to introduce me to, because the nurses support group that is solely for nurses started, like it's Minnesota based, right? So I'm just reminding myself that I want that introduction and I want to make that connection. I know that some of the women who come to our healthcare and allied professionals group are also members of that. And so they do share some information, but I'd love to speak to the people that do that program, because I know it's been around for a long time and it's just doing such great work. And you're familiar with it as well, right, Diana? So we've talked about it.
Here.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it's in person necessarily. I think it is in person too?
No.
Oh, it's not. It is, yeah.
Saturday morning.
Oh, we're also Saturday mornings. That's not handy. But do you know what time? Oh, well, we're not till 10:30. So there you go. You go to 4 hours of meetings in a row. Or I'll fire you. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yes.
And so for 15 years before I became a nurse, so I didn't have to worry about filling out
Right.
there's a questionnaire that asks you those questions, but I actually worked with the Minnesota-based, the woman who started it, Marie Manthey.
Amazing.
And we held meetings in person. What was it? Health Services, the professional health HPSP made them nurses were
Amazing.
required to attend these meetings. And in addition, some of them had to go to AA too. And
Right, of course. And there are those requirements. What we're,
a lot of shame. Those
Yeah.
a lot of shame.
Yeah.
Nurses, because
yes.
we're
Of
just
course.
not supposed to be like this stuff.
And you know, I know caduceus, right? There's also caduceus, which is another, it's 12-step based, but it's another space specifically for healthcare professionals. What we're trying to do, and it's happening slowly, we just don't have the resources to put somebody on the project of introducing the She Recovers Healthcare and Allied Professionals meeting and our other meetings as meetings that should count towards meeting attendance for people who are on probation or being, yeah, and we need to do that. I know that we are approved by at least 8 or 10 nursing boards, I think maybe it is, or I'm not sure exactly the right language of who it is that does that approval. And there's this wonderful Mitzi Everett, who's a member of, and she's like, it's her goal. She's gonna, you know, kind of spend some time over this next little while once she retires for good to making sure that more people know about us so that they can access us. But I love hearing the history. I just love knowing that something has been around for as long as it has. And so I'd love to know more about it and the people involved, just to pay my respects to them. There was another hand. Okay.
Heather R. asks, I am a woman who is active in AA, but have struggled with the aspect of ego smashing and character defects in the steps because I've struggled with low self-esteem. Do you have any suggestions?
Sorry, can you ask the last part of it?
She struggled with the aspect of ego smashing and character defects in the steps because she struggled with low self-esteem. And do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I also struggled with the whole ego thing early in recovery because I know I was in therapy and working my first set of serious steps. I mean, I did those pretend ones, like whatever. And my therapist helped me because I didn't, and I was also, again, doing my women's studies degree at the time. And so a lot of things were kind of like, I was contemplating how this worked for me, and ego didn't work for me because I came to that program and came into recovery. All I knew was like, I was so deflated. Like if I had ego, it was like nowhere to be seen. And so my sponsor and therapist at the same time helped me think, like, kind of, I had to reformulate, like I have to rewrite a lot of things. And again, like, you know, I tried to rewrite the steps and that didn't work. But what I could rewrite is I could say, that doesn't work for me, that part. And I can, if I'm working with a sponsor, I can say, like, I don't want to talk about ego because I don't get it, or it doesn't, or it feels harmful to me to talk about it in that way. But what I did really attach to, and I think it's related, although not the same thing, was self-centeredness. And for me, I could work a lot more on the idea that I'm self-centered. I think I've got all the answers and I can do all the things and it's my way. And, you know, somebody might be able to look at that. And so I guess for me, like, I don't have to conform to that concept in 12-step recovery. I don't have to conform to any of those concepts. The only requirement for me to be in a meeting, in a fellowship recovery and say that I'm a member is the desire to stop drinking in that case. So I don't need to, like, I can say the ego thing doesn't work for me. And also we can recognize that, you know, that ego, there's a Christian basis to ego. It's a male, there's, you know, a male kind of underlying thing about ego. So we don't have to. I mean, I think that we can reformulate things. And I guess I want to say that, yeah, I think that's probably what I would just say, is that not all, and then what I want to say is, perhaps in turn, you might come to a different understanding of what ego means, and it might be useful for you. Or you might hear somebody say something and share about it and go, oh, I get that. But for me, like, what I had to translate that is like, okay, when I got in here, like, I didn't know what to do to live. I didn't know how I was going to stay alive for the children that I wanted to stay alive for. I didn't even really want to stay alive for me. I wanted to do it for them. And so for me, the idea that I was self-centered and I thought that I had all the answers, which is kind of like ego, needed to kind of go away. I needed to accept that I don't have the answers, that things had not actually been going all that well for me up until that point, and that I had to be open to other things. But you know, and again, sorry, this is I found out on Tuesday the reason why. Have you ever been to a conference, like a big conference, and the rooms are so freezing? Do you know why they're so cold? I always thought it was to keep us awake. Do you know why they're so cold? This blows me away. Because most of those rooms are made for men in suits. That was mind blowing to me. Because yeah, if I had a suit on, I would, anyway, that totally has nothing to do with anything. But because I just learned it on Tuesday, I wanted to share it. And I also want to say that, you know, like the idea of ego in some people's recovery and in the program, in 12-step programs is a big concept. And it's like, I'm not saying that because I think that you don't have to adopt it or adapt to it, that's right or wrong. I'm not the person that gets to say that. I'm just saying that if the idea of trying to work within the concept of ego is going to drive you out of something that is otherwise providing you a lifeline, then don't focus on that. Don't focus on that, and have conversations. Like, we can go back, right? Have difficult conversations about things you believe with people who believe otherwise. So I hope that helps. Yes.
So I love that you brought that eye thirst, because I have not seen that. I'm actually in Al-Anon, and at our church, we are starting a all except like any group, whatever program you're in. But one of the directions was to say it can't just be 12 steps. So I think this is fascinating, but it's men and women. Is there a resource that, I mean, it's weird for me to go out and research other recovery programs, but I mean, there's so many to figure out where to go and try to find some options we can put on the table. Because we have self-harming people, we have OA, NA, everybody's in this group, FA, everything.
Right.
So
Yeah.
to try to find that out, it's a weird one, but is there a place that you would suggest?
So that's why we're so unique and yet so broad, right? Because we're all recovering from something. So you can, you know, you're welcome regardless of how you identify, like what you identify as being in recovery from. 85% of the people in our community do identify as having a substance use disorder. So there's that. And because we're women, I guess that a lot of the programs that like, so Life Ring and Smart Recovery are very specific to substances, but so there's those others, Refuge Recovery. No, not Refuge Recovery. Refuge Recovery, bad. Recovery Dharma, good, apparently is how they do it. So Recovery Dharma. And I think, you know, I guess I some of these programs are, I don't know kind of how people who don't identify as having a substance use issue fit or feel in some of those programs. One of the reasons that we're all in recovery from something was actually, it wasn't because like I had this brilliant concept of how we're all in recovery from something to begin with. It was because at our very first retreat, I wanted my two best friends to come, and they had never had a substance use issue. And I was like, well, you know, Val's husband sent her, I want a divorce email, and Sharon has chronic allergies and she's always sick, and I want them to come. So like, She Recovers retreats are just for everything and everybody, because we're all in recovery from something. And then also, when I was growing up, one of my best friends in recovery, well, a few of them were in Naranon. And so they would have like, we'd go to conventions, and like the addicts would come over here, and we'd have speakers over here, and Naranon was over here. And, you know, Kathy would be going, oh, great speaker. And I was like, well, I want to go there more. You know, I probably could have, but there was this kind of like, this is our space. It was, and rightly so, like Alan, like, this is ours. Like, you guys got everything. Like this, like, just give us this one little speaker session. And I, you know, so I had started questioning that even back then. Like, what if we just all, and I know that Al-Anon and AA in particular are very, you know, do everything together, but it is a little bit also like we're very separate, and for reason, like we want to have a sole purpose of different programs. But I also love that there's a space, and that we're creating a space where we can all be together, because I say this all the time, right? You know, maybe it's substances, maybe it's love addiction, maybe it's sex addiction or gambling, but like, that's not really our problem. That's been our solution. Like it's the underlying trauma and the anxiety and the mental health stuff in our childhoods and and all of those things, like we are so much more alike than different. But yeah, I can't think of everybody. A lot of people say for many years, what about He Recovers? Like, when are you going to do He Recovers? And I'm like, well, I'm not, but I would love somebody to do that, but also like it's, the other thing is that starting a nonprofit is not for the faint of heart. And I think there's quite a bit out there for men. I always say, just go follow Tommy Rosen. Tommy Rosen has a lot of answers for men. And apparently more recently, don't follow Russell Brand. That's what I hear is the thing. Yeah.
Two things from the chat. First, just a statement. Wendy Mann said, "Key for me to remember that 12 steps were written by white men in the 1930s, only a bit after women gained the right to vote in the US. In other words, written before women had much of a voice." So I thought that was good for what we're saying there. And then we had an Al-Anon member ask, "Is there a resource to find options for directing people to various 12-step recovery programs?" Oh, never mind. I'm already reading a question.
Okay.
Taken by Wendy, who had her hand raised, so I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure I got that out there for her.
Yeah. And here's the thing, right? Yes. There was a slide at one point when I was going to talk about 12 step. I was going to say, what if AA had been started by Barb and Brenda instead of Bill and Bob? How would it look? How would it look different, and would it? And it doesn't really, I guess for me, like the foundation and where it came from, like it was, in my view, like it was a gift from God. And you may not use the word God. It was a gift from Mary. It was a gift from whoever. At Mobilized Recovery, there was actually the last working copy of the big book was there, like with all the kind of scribbles and whatnot. Like it's kind of like a moment, right? And yeah, I mean, and so it was still one of the most profound things to happen in this world. And I think that we don't need to say, we can recognize its beginnings, and we can evolve with it. And the program itself can evolve. And could it evolve a little faster? Sometimes I think in terms of language, I think it could. And again, I shared this yesterday. How proud am I of AA for changing the language, a fellowship of men and women to a fellowship of people. Like, so if we can do that, because I bet that was easy, right? I bet that was just no problem. Let's just do that. And then it was done. Then we can do other things. And again, like I said yesterday, what I really love is that, I'm not sure, like, I don't necessarily subscribe to the big book being the Holy Bible. I think I don't even subscribe to the Holy Bible being the Holy Bible. Like, I think that it was what it was, and we take it, and it's what we started with, and it's beautiful, and it's got all sorts of wonderful things that we all need to know in it, or some of us want to know, but that we can evolve. And so I see that 12-step fellowships do that with in NA in particular. Like we write new books often. We have like a lot of different editions of our basic text, but in all fellowships and programs, I see like the brochures, right? They're just, I just was saying yesterday too, there's like a brand new one for young people, one for those of us over 50. So there is evolution, and I'm glad about that. But yeah, we can't get away from its history. But I guess what I love about AA is, if we're going to talk about history, we have to acknowledge that even Bill W. said, like, you're going to get recovery, and you're going to go out and you're going to do other things, and you're going to create other movements, and like all these other things are going to happen. And, like we have all this talk about like ayahuasca. My daughter did. I'm never going to do ayahuasca. I'm never going to do ayahuasca. Taryn did ayahuasca, and I have a grandson because of it. She did not get pregnant at the ayahuasca ceremony. She had a breakthrough in some trauma from childhood that had told her whole life she was never going to have a baby. And she had a breakthrough and came home and said, I think maybe I might have a baby if that should happen. And a year later, she met her baby daddy. So, but I'll never do that. But so we talk about like psychedelics, and in AA, it's like, well, talk to Bill W. about psychedelics, like there's just, so I think if we want to hold it out as the reason that we're, as we can recognize it for both some of the oppressive characteristics of the language, but also if we search the history, we see all these other really innovative, and still at its time, it's still the most remarkable thing, I think, to happen. And I don't know that any of us would be here having this conversation without that as its foundation. So, yes. How are we doing? Yeah. Hi, Sherry.
I cannot thank you enough for using your platform to talk about how, when we're talking about many paths, there's often that exclusion of 12-step recovery. I do some speaking in the family recovery realm, and what I'm finding is alternative paths are always demonizing 12-step recovery in order to sell their platform.
Yeah.
And every single training that I've gone to for anything that's family recovery related, because I want to know what these alternative approaches are.
Yeah.
They're using 12-step recovery, they're rebranding it, they're
Yeah.
naming it. And I think that let's give credit where credit is due, and awesome that you're developing this thing.
Yeah.
That's going to be helpful for people.
Yeah.
But I love that you're using your voice to talk about that, because
Yeah.
I do feel that we're doing harm.
Totally. And that's why I dislike immensely the concept of alternative pathways, because you're automatically othering 12-step recovery. And we don't need that. Women are dying. Men are dying. Children are dying. So thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Where I work, we only
Yes.
12 steps.
That's
and I think
okay.
The opposite thing where like people are dying because they think that's the only choice and it doesn't work for them.
And so what's your solution?
Offering all the different solutions. These are just
Yeah,
the facts. These
yeah.
are all the different ways that
Yeah.
you can do it.
Yeah.
What works best for you.
Yeah.
Let's meet them where they're at.
Yeah,
and go
totally.
from there.
And I think in an ideal world, again, in 1987, it was go to 12-step or die, and I would have died. There's no doubt. But today, I think, and I really do believe, I think that 12-step facilitation should be introduced. It doesn't have to be, but I think it's a great thing that it's introduced in so many, like everybody goes, oh, all the treatment centers are 12-step. And I said, if it's treated as an introduction to here's one way, you know, like here's the process. I mean, we all go through the process. Like you have to, honesty, open-mindedness, like you've got to kind of learn these concepts. What better place to learn it than in a program that's got it all written out already and it's figured out. But as you leave treatment, and I've had therapists and treatment providers say this to me, I'm sure you'd admit it. You know, when you send somebody out on their way, that person is not going to go to meetings. They're going to say they are to get out of here. They're going to say so their family thinks they are. But you know, and you know, maybe it's not only just because it's 12-step, but you kind of have a sense of where they're at in their recovery and where they're at on the stages of change, which is so instrumental. But I just think it's, yeah, like if people have more options. And again, like I love the return thing, right? On people settling into recovery and then going, you know, people who would never say, would say, I'll never do 12-step. And then they want connection. And where do you go? Well, there's this place and they go there. It is really about empowering people to make choices. And I think that that's really kind of, you know, support, connection, and empowerment is what we really try to preach using your language. Try not to preach too much, but I do. I mean, obviously I preach all day long. Whoever listened to me, don't sit beside me on an airplane. You'll leave with a brochure and a card. And yeah. And you know, almost every time I get a me too, like my kid is struggling or my sister or my brother. And so like when we talk about when we are ready, we recover out loud so that other women can find and join our movement. And for me, I use the example of sometimes that just means you start talking about your story on an airplane beside somebody. And, you know, and the other important part of that is when we're ready. So it doesn't mean that you do what I did when the first time I was waiting to go into treatment in 1987. And I was so excited about it that I went to my doctor for my final kind of thing. And I said, now, if you ever want anybody to talk about recovery, you can call me. I'm like, I hadn't even gone to treatment yet, you know, and like, I'm still waiting for the call. But is that time? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was incredible. So I just have a few housekeeping things I want to say. First off, thank you again to Dawn, and thank you to everybody here who made this happen today, from the staff to the people who all came. I'm just amazed and blown away. This was an amazing event to put on. I'm so grateful for all of you. I wanted to say a few things in the chat. A lot of people were asking for access to the Anonymous People movie. I am going to be sending the PowerPoint and how to access that movie in an email after this meeting to everybody who registered. If you did not register, but you came today, if you could just write your email on the sign-in sheet, and I will make sure that I get that email to you. So also, we are very lucky. Dawn, after this, has okayed, she's going to be signing some of her She Recovers Every Day books right over there, right where Deanna and Doug are. So if you want to purchase a book, she's going to sign those for us, and it's going to be incredible. Once again, I just want to say for the CEU certificates, please sign in. Make sure if you haven't signed in already, please go see Sherry, sign in so I can make sure that we get those certificates. I will have those out to you in 1 to 2 weeks after this. And then just finally, if you guys don't mind, I just wanted to read today's reading to you guys from her book. It was just a really fitting one. Are you okay with that, Dawn? Okay. So September 22nd, positive language, strengths-based positive language matters, and what receives attention grows. So focusing on our weaknesses, it is not in our best interest. What if I had been invited to focus on my strengths throughout my life rather than my defects? What if I were guided to ask what was right about me, good about me, about what I did well? We need to acknowledge our own inherent strengths. We need to focus on our own self-determination. A strengths-based approach, not a shame-based approach, will yield much better results. We all have potential. We all have strengths. We all are capable. We need to find and then use the language that lifts us up and release the words that we whisper to ourselves or speak aloud that tear us down. What are some of your strengths? What do you know is right about you, good about you? What do you do well? Can you be mindful about the words you use regularly to talk about yourself? Remember to talk about your strengths, especially when your weaknesses seem louder. I thought that was so fitting for today. And if you want more of that, come over and buy a book. Thank you all so much.
Thank you again, everybody. It's just been delightful.